The following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
Hello everyone. Welcome to No Credentials Required, where you don't need a press pass to talk sports. We are proudly presented by Belly Up Sports. My name is Ryan McCarthy. I'm one of the hosts of the show. To my right is my co-host, Dustin Henry. Dustin, how are we doing tonight?
We're doing all right. It's Saturday in our hearts, Ryan.
Yes.
Is it Saturday now? The world may never know. But this is a very special episode.
Yes,
and
it is.
I'm gonna let you, as our fearless leader, I'm gonna let you explain why.
Okay.
Maybe what we're doing.
Yeah, so I mentioned this in Tuesday's recording, in episode 261. This is going to be a special episode. This is not part of the canon for No Credentials Required. This is not officially episode 262. We're pre-recording this episode on Wednesday night, as I'm going to be at an event on Saturday morning. What we're going to talk about today is, this episode, and special episode, is the Mr. McMahon Netflix limited series. And I just want to take care of some business before we really dig into it and take care of the business side of things, and remind you to like and subscribe and all that stuff. If you are somebody who is, I guess I would say you have younger, if you have your younger audience, or if you typically listen to the show while you have your kids in your car, I wouldn't for this episode. This episode contains some mature content. It's definitely not suitable for younger audiences, because we're going to discuss some things that may be that are sensitive topics, and we want to address them. We want to get that out of the way as such, so we can just let people know this was not a family friendly series for sure. So there's a reason why it was TVMA. Not TV 14. So we just want to preface it with, a lot of this material is going to be referenced from the source material itself, which is the limited series, excuse me. So if there's anything of a nature that is, I guess you could say, triggering, we just want to warn you ahead of time.
Yeah, we don't want to cause any problems. And if you do have younger members of your family that perhaps listen along to the show with you, we don't want to be the source of any awkward conversations. So Ryan and I are going to try to tap dance around some things the best we can, but some of these topics will be of a sensitive nature. And we just want to give you the warning so that you can take extra care, and also just warn you that we are going to express our feelings about this documentary when we talk about it, and we will be quoting things from the documentary, and we'll leave it at that. And we hope you enjoy this one. But this might be, if you listen with kids or a younger audience, this might be one to check out solo while you're washing the dishes, maybe with a pair of headphones.
Yep, or you're running errands by yourself in your car, getting the lumber from the local tool store, local tool and garden store. But before we do that, we just want to remind our audience, please, give us a follow on social media, as always, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for No Credentials Required. You can also check out our other podcasts and articles on bellyupsports.com. And on the podcast side, you can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Music, iHeart, TuneIn, and Pandora. And also, please don't forget to hit that notification bell on Twitter and on YouTube. That way you know when a live show goes up, or there's an announcement about the show, or we put show clips on there like I did this afternoon put up a clip from the last episode. So you want to check that out. You want to hit that notification bell so you're well informed. Also, on the podcast side, rate, review, comment, which means leave a rating. 5-star rating would be very, very helpful. Leave a review wherever you can leave a review. And if you're on Spotify or you're watching on the Belly Up YouTube channel, leave us a comment. We'll definitely read it on the air. So, all that being out of the way, let's dive into this limited series. And we're going to start with episode 1, which was titled Jr. We're going to try to spend about 10 minutes per episode and just kind of get things out of the way and just talk about each episode as we go along. So episode 1 was primarily about the start of Vince McMahon talking about meeting his father, getting involved in professional wrestling for the first time, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, as it was known at that time. He purchases the promotion, renames it, starts promoting it outside of the territories. And back in the 70s and early 80s, had the territories of the northeastern states, also around the United States and Canada. And it talks about Hulk Hogan being brought in and really pushing professional wrestling into the mainstream. So let's talk about this episode real quick, Dustin. For the next couple minutes, Dustin, give me your thoughts about this episode. What were some things that you kind of stuck out to you, or some things that kind of brought things to the front of your mind?
Well, episode 1, I think, really does a good job of laying the foundation for the rest of this series. And, you know, it was a very timely release because a lot of news had just broken about Mr. McMahon right before this series debuted. And people that know Vince McMahon to the extent that they know him, I think were surprised that he would do this. But it's a little bit of a callback to our previous review about the Pete Rose documentary that we watched on HBO a few episodes back.
Mm-hmm.
The documentary, without expressly saying it, as a matter of fact, Vince says it himself right at the beginning before news breaks. It establishes Vince McMahon's unreliability as a narrator, or perhaps a little bit of a skewed perception of how he sees himself compared to perhaps how others see him. So they don't, what I liked about this documentary, especially with the first episode, is they don't jump headlong into the controversy and some of the things. And if you want to brush up on what controversy we're referring to, there's other places to do that. We're not going to get into specifics about it here. We're talking specifically about the documentary. But I thought the documentary as a whole, skillfully, the controversies kind of are a shadow over the whole documentary, but they don't jump right into it. And some people, I could see a narrative where people are disappointed about the direction of this documentary, because it is a wrestling history lesson a little bit. It's a history lesson about the WWF/WWE. Yep. And how the McMahon family is intertwined with it. You cannot talk about Vince McMahon without talking about the WWF/E, because the company is intertwined. But I will just say this: transition and cuts are done very well to highlight certain points. And episode 1, right at the beginning, Vince McMahon says he's not comfortable talking about himself. He says that he can talk about others. He can go perform. He's good with that. And he says that a lot of times he's playing a character, and he basically tells you right up front, you're not going to get the real stories from me. And then it cuts, and then they ask why, and he says, because, you know, those stories are pretty crazy. I censored it there for you. But then it cuts to Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan says, you're not going to get Vince McMahon. I don't think anybody really knows Vince McMahon. And Stephanie says things like that. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I did not know that Vince's father did not come into his life until he was 12 years old. I had heard that the first few years of his upbringing, he grew up with nothing. But he kind of talks about how all he ever wanted to do once he talks about first meeting his father, and that he expected a big hug, and he got something a little different. But he said that he, quote, fell in love with his father just the same, and he wanted to get into the family business right away. And I thought episode 1 did a great job of setting up how he took that business over from his father and kind of started putting steps in place to take it to another level. But I want to get some of your thoughts before I talk forever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you nailed it on the head. It definitely set up the foundation. And I mentioned during the Charlie Hustle mini limited series on HBO and Max, I said, you're going to, the Last Dance kind of set up how docu-series and limited series for sports are going to be filmed from here on out. And this kind of took that model, and the Ringer and Netflix, because this Netflix produced it, in association with the Ringer, which is Bill Simmons's media company.
Yep.
And they did almost pretty much the exact same thing, the exact same format. They put the foundations in, but they also mixed in a little bit of today, and a little bit of a comic relief. Because I know this is kind of a heavy episode.
Yeah.
When they brought up the breaking news of the one lawsuit that came out, which will be revealed in episode 6 about possible human trafficking and assault. You saw Vince McMahon leave the set. You saw a guy run behind him. It kind of reminded me of Dave Chappelle's Black Bush skit, where they're sitting at the table and Dave's got his entourage. He's like, we're talking about Iraq. We're talking about Iraq. We're talking about the oil. We're talking about the oil. All of a sudden, you see him smack the pitcher and go run it. Everybody goes running. It reminded me a little bit of that. And I said, I'm trying to bring a little comic relief into a serious topic. It's typically that's my coping mechanism.
We'll get to some comic relief in episode 2, perhaps, Ryan.
Yeah, there's some there. But another aspect of it was that Vince McMahon Jr.'s relationship to his father, Vince McMahon Sr., where he met him, he wanted to be like him, he grew up in a trailer park, got beat up regularly by his stepfather, and finally met his father, wanted to be part of the business, and Vince McMahon Sr. said, yeah, all right, let's see what you got. And he worked the territory in Bangor, Maine, did very well there, came down to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and it kind of serendipity, a little bit of serendipity, as we kind of talked about with other sports events and sports documentaries. Vince McMahon Sr. needed somebody to do the broadcasting, to do the play-by-play, because the regular guy wanted more money. And Vince McMahon Sr. says, all right, Vince, all right, Junior, you're going to be broadcasting. You're going to be doing play-by-play. And yeah, they said that absolutely at the beginning of it, Vince Jr. was not that good.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of episode 1, and of the doc is the way they cut to things, the timing. It was great because they had the tape of Vince doing it, I think in 1976 or something like that, and then it cuts to Bruce Pritchard, and he goes, "Vince was a horrible announcer."
But they said you know how to tell a story.
Yes.
He can get you emotionally invested, and that's what great broadcasters do. That's what great broadcasters get you to feel, get you to get a sense of the feel of what's going on while you're watching the game or while you're watching the match. Yeah. And then it comes up to the day that Vince McMahon Sr. passes away, and Vince McMahon Jr. has said, it was very interesting that my father told me for the first time that he loved me the day before he died. Yeah. And then it cuts to Tony Atlas. And it's interesting that they use some of their real names and their stage names in this. Yep. Tony White, aka Tony Atlas, Anthony White, aka Tony Atlas. The cut scene says, Vince Sr. hated Vince Jr.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
No, the cuts. He's like, I don't think Vince liked his father. You know,
Vince liked his father.
It's just
it's very Bill Cosby like voice out of Tony Atlas. He looked like Schwarzenegger, but he talks like Bill Cosby. We're big fans of Tony Atlas. Don't sue us. But then we kind of get to the end. We'll get to Hulk Hogan, how he gets involved. He came in from NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, works with Vince Sr. He wants to do Rocky 3. He kind of foresees what his career is going to be like in the future, but he says, I want to do Rocky 3. And Vince McMahon Sr. says, all right, if you do Rocky 3, you're not going to be here ever again.
Yeah.
And does it anyway. Big success. Goes back to NWA
He went back to Vern Gagne said, "Hey,
Yes.
come to the AWA," and Hulk Hogan really
AWA, sorry.
started going. No, it's confusing, man. I can't keep
Yeah.
all the territories straight.
Yeah. So, and then it just it kind of brought back, and he came back after his stint in AWA, and it kind of gave an idea of what Vince McMahon Senior or Vince McMahon Jr. is going to do after his dad passes away. He's looking into the future, which brings us to episode 2. Episode 2 is named Heat. This is where we really getting to see the success of WrestleMania 1 and bringing wrestling into the mainstream. We got Saturday night's main event, which I remember those days. They get, and basically WWF talent at the time called WWF, now it's WWE, talent's working nonstop between wrestling shows, house shows, television appearances, and sure, they're making a lot of money, but they're also working pretty much 24/7, 365.
Yes.
No days off. No days off.
And their contracts were not guaranteed. If you did not wrestle, you did not get paid. So a lot of guys wrestled hurt, which does a great job of setting up how some may use a dependence on painkillers and things to get by and other means, which dovetails beautifully into the steroid trial and things that are covered in this episode.
Yeah. And one of the things that was covered in this episode was a meeting in WrestleMania 2, right before WrestleMania 2. Jesse Ventura, he tries to organize a union, and Hulk Hogan, basically, as Tony Atlas would say, he ratted out everyone to Vince.
Yeah, he stooged them.
Hulk Hogan stooged everybody.
Yeah, he stooged Jesse. That's and you know, this story's kind of been known for years, and I was kind of shocked when Hulk Hogan was just like, yeah, Jesse was trying to start up a union, and I went to Vince and I said, you know, Vince, these guys, they're gonna walk out on you, and you know, I just am surprised that he was just like, yeah, I told him, like, because I wanted to support Vince. I wanted to, and that kind of is an echoing theme. There are people that will continue to support Vince McMahon no matter what, because they feel a certain way about him. They have, if I may assume, some people view him as kind of like a fatherly figure, and realize what he did for their careers. So some people, for lack of a better term, are Vince McMahon loyalists, and that's the way it is. And Hulk Hogan had enough pull in the company. He wasn't really going to see repercussions from the locker room for that, but this theme repeats itself later in the episode when Hulk Hogan must testify, which we'll get into. But I was just shocked that he admitted it. And then it's interesting to hear Vince's perspective, because Vince said all the wrestlers walked out on him. Nobody was going to show up. It wasn't really a union. It wasn't anything. Jesse couldn't get anything going. It was nonsense, basically. He shrugs it off. But what he conveniently omits is Hulk Hogan told you. You know, that's why. And then you individually met with the wrestlers reportedly and said, hey, anybody that goes to the meeting with Jesse won't have a job. That's the part that he kind of leaves out there.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Hulk Hogan, who was the guy making the money for the company at the time, between house shows, media appearances, merchandising, and that those days WWF was being hand over fist.
Yes,
with merchandising, because he was the one that was the top draw. Because you didn't see anybody walking around as a kid wearing a Big John Studd T-shirt.
No.
Everybody's wearing Hulk Hogan or Macho Man or Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Yeah, you don't see anybody wearing anybody else's merchandise.
Yeah, and Tony Atlas, We're going to be referring to Tony Atlas a lot because another thing I liked about this documentary in general is it kind of transverses the different eras
Yes.
between who they cut to. You'll see, is Stone Cold in the earlier episodes? Not really, because he wasn't, but Tony Atlas was there. So Tony Atlas and Hulk Hogan, those are the guys that they were using. And they got a lot of good content from them. But Tony Atlas, again, he was saying, if you put Hulk Hogan on the card, the building sold out. Simple
Yep.
as that.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that.
Yep. And then it dovetails into WrestleMania 2, which was great idea, poor execution, which goes in WrestleMania 3 because you got to figure out a way to, keep the momentum, get a way to keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
And this time around, they said, you know what? Let's put Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant in a quote, never before seen match. But as we all know in wrestling lore, these two had met previous.
Yeah.
With Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant meeting in at Shea Stadium. They sold out Shea Stadium. They wrestled in Japan. They wrestled in the AWA. So, but again, Vince McMahon being the promoter he is, basically just one of the best promoters probably ever in terms of wrestling.
Yeah.
Decides to put this together, convinces Andre the Giant during the filming of Princess Bride to have a back surgery, which is considered radical at the time, but in today's medical field would be considered routine.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, it was considered radical because you know what he's going to do.
Yeah.
So he gets the back surgery. They have the match at WrestleMania, and by the way, this member measuring contest between the 93,000 at Pontiac Silverdome. It was really 88,000. Shut up, Deadspin. Nobody likes you.
Yeah, well, but that's the thing. To me, I think it was another thing because I thought they used Dave Meltzer a lot in this documentary as well. Dave Meltzer, as a wrestling historian, Dave Meltzer's very good, but he doesn't always get it right. But I think what this did perfectly is this undercut the very theme that Vince and perhaps members of the WWF/E at one point have one narrative, 93,000 people. And Meltzer says, you look at the data, it's really about 78,000. And Dave Schoenecker says, we'll never know the real number. And the quote that was key here that I highlighted is, nothing any wrestler tells you should be regarded as fact. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that quote, but I think what it does is it reinforces the theme of the overall documentary is, what story are we getting here? Is it what degree is it entertainment? What degree is it a character? It just makes you question everything in the documentary. I think that quote really undercuts it. And one thing, if I may lead us into a focus of this episode, the steroid trial of the early 90s, I found it very ironic because they start to get into some of the controversy that embroiled Vince McMahon from the very beginning. I think showing that controversy was not a new thing for Vince McMahon. It followed him. He made appearances on Donahue. It did not go well for him. He says he likes confrontation during that. But he talks specifically about when Hulk Hogan went on the Arsenio Hall show and denied using steroids. He said, when you do stuff like that and you don't tell the truth, it's an open door for people to come and get you. And I must admit, I found that a little ironic coming from one Vincent Kennedy McMahon with the current climate that he's in and also everything that we knew that was coming for the rest of this doc. I had to highlight that quote when he said, when you do stuff like that, it's an open door for people to come and get you. I went, oh man, the irony.
So that leads into a couple of scandals, one of them being the Ring Boy scandal, which,
Yes.
well, we'll kind of tiptoe. I wouldn't say tiptoe around because again, it's explicit content. We really don't want to trample any toes out there or make anyone really lose their mind. But it also kind of dovetails into the steroid scandal, which Vince McMahon was brought up on federal charges because of his doctor prescribing and then selling steroids.
Yes,
to his wrestlers.
Dr. Zohorian, I believe.
Dr. Zohorian, yep.
Yeah. And again, this is the thing. They tried to lay it at the feet of Vince and basically make an argument that if you didn't have them working such a schedule, they accused Vince of encouraging his wrestlers to take steroids. Now, we will never know if he did that. But again, a key reason that Vince McMahon will spoil it a little bit, he is victorious. The charges against him are dropped because of the testimony of one Hulk Hogan. And Vince says that Hulk was very cagey in the way that he testified. He would not confirm that the way the narrative makes it sound is the prosecution was trying to lead him in a direction to get him to say certain things. Mm-hmm. And when you cut to it, Hulk Hogan had already left for WCW at this time. That was the thing that I had forgotten. And he goes, Vince and I were at each other's throats at this time. Whether that's true or not, we won't know, because a lot of people question the credibility of Hulk Hogan and some of his stories. But
speaking of another guy who kind of goes by his own narrative.
Yes. But even he said, I didn't tell him what they wanted to. Just so it's another thing where they're rivals at this time, but he still supports Vince. He essentially backed Vince and supported Vince during that trial. So it says something about their relationship, I think.
Yeah. Which leads us into episode 3, entitled Screwjob.
This is one of my favorites.
This was because we both were paying attention to wrestling again at that time.
Yes.
I'll admit, but from I think my freshman year through my senior year, I really didn't give a rip about wrestling because WWE was on the decline. Mm-hmm. They were having trouble finding the next star, and they mentioned it. They kind of at the end of episode 2, they kind of went to Ultimate Warrior in WrestleMania 6. That didn't really work out. If you know about Ultimate Warrior's story, he's very difficult to deal with. So he kept having to go into WWF, having to go back to the well with Hogan again and again and again. And finally he leaves the company, goes to Hollywood, and then signs with WCW. Well, now you got to find the next star. You got to find the next guy who's going to carry that company. And speaking of another guy, although I think he's a little bit more, how could I put this? He doesn't do his own, he doesn't follow his own narrative. But you could tell he's telling the truth a lot more than Vince McMahon or Hulk Hogan. It's Bret Hart.
Yeah, but Bret views wrestling as art, and wrestling is very important to Bret. And I will admit, sometimes Bret can come off as bitter, but I will say that I agree with you. I find it a lot easier to find the truth in what Bret Hart is saying.
Yeah. And this kind of goes into the episode where Bret Hart, WCW, and Eric Bischoff. It's interesting that Eric Bischoff in this particular episode, he had heavy parts in it. A lot of stories with him saying, we were definitely going up against WWF at the time because we wanted to sign everybody. We wanted to sign guys who had been with WWF. We knew what they could do. You bring in Hulk Hogan, you bring in Randy Savage, you eventually bring in Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, which goes into the infamous curtain call at Madison Square Garden in 1996. Because then you bring in Paul Levesque, who would also be known as Hunter Hearst Helmsley.
Yep.
And you go into the curtain call, which kind of people say that curtain call is the day that you knew wrestling wasn't real. No, It isn't. The day you knew wrestling wasn't real was when Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Iron Sheik were caught on a New Jersey highway, got caught for speeding, but also had cocaine in the car.
Yeah. I mean, I will go with you there. That's the real reason, but I think the curtain call blew the whole illusion up for good, because I think because they got that footage, and you see Diesel, Kevin Nash get up, and then they're all hugging after they just wrestled the match. So I think that was, for a younger generation, that was probably the first shot across the bow. And Triple H really took the brunt of it for that.
Yeah.
But I do want to go back really quickly, because I know I have a habit of stretching things out. I want to go back, another piece of irony not irony, but I will give credit to the documentarians here, because I was saying, please ask the question. Please ask the question, because this is the episode where they really get in to how WCW and WWF were going head to head. And Eric Bischoff straight up says, I was competing with Vince. I was trying to drive him out of business. I offered the talent lighter contract, like less performances and lighter contracts, because I knew that he was having them wrestle a lot up there, and he offered him more money. Now, Vince he said, Ted Turner's trying to put me out of business. And the interviewer, I will say, I give him credit. He said, you don't find that similar to what you did with the territories? He said, no, I see no parallels. Vince did the exact same thing to the territories. They get into it in episode 1. He took characters that other people had helped develop. He offered them more money and better contracts to wrestle with the WWF. Vince McMahon undid the territories. And then when they ask him about it a couple episodes later, when he says Ted Turner was trying to put me out of business, he says, I see no parallels. He goes, I was competing with them. This was different. And I'm like, no, it's not.
And it kind of goes into what Bischoff was saying about how Vince was trying to play the victim. Saying that a big bad corporation was going after a supposed family-owned
business. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that whole thing. And it's funny, they were talking about 83 weeks, and it says, and Eric Bischoff says, 83 weeks. It's a really catchy name for a podcast.
Bischoff, I'll out myself. I am a regular listener of 83 weeks and Something to Wrestle, thanks to you, Ryan. But Bischoff is a self-promotion machine.
Oh, forget about it. And that's okay. Some people are really good at it, and some people aren't. So and it's kind of going on with the screw job, and everything kind of snowballing. With Hall and Nash going to WCW, they formed the alliance with Hulk Hogan to the into the NWO. Nitro beating WWE Raw for 83 consecutive weeks. And at the time, Bret Hart had signed a 20-year contract with the WWF while all this was going on. And then one day Vince caught the numbers, probably because of house show numbers being bad and television ratings not being what they were, having to go to Bret and say, there's loopholes in this contract where you can get out of this contract and sign with WC and go over to WCW and get yourself that guaranteed money that every other superstar that has left the company has gotten with WCW. And he managed to work those loopholes and actually managed to get out of his contract. Then came the Montreal Screwjob, because somehow you had to get the title off of Bret, so you avoided what happened with Medusa on Monday Night Raw when she threw that title in the garbage can.
Yep.
And it's kind of funny that they went back to the Wendy Richter incident, where Wendy Richter was forced to vacate the title, but she got the same type of treatment because, as Vince would say, it's not personal.
Yep.
It's
business. And he says it multiple times in this. He says, I'll do anything for the business. And I think he's proven that time and time again. We'll get into it in later episodes, but it's painting the parallels that, again, he is willing to do anything for the business. And particularly with this episode, listen to the podcast, Dark Side of the Ring Unheard. There is a segment with Bret Hart, and they use quotes that were not used in the Dark Side of the Ring episode on the Montreal Screwjob. And there's some really enlightening stuff from Bret's side of the story from another angle. If you're like Ryan and I, and you can't get enough of this whole time period, I never get fatigued of Montreal Screwjob stuff. So it was welcome in this documentary.
Yeah. And the one thing about this documentary that The Last Dance did, and to an extent, Charlie Hustle did, at least for me, because I was in that era. I was born in that era where Pete Rose was the big thing, was the big money maker in Major League Baseball because of the hits chase and his commercial presence. This brought back a lot of nostalgia.
Oh yeah.
From Jump Street, from episode 1 all the way through, it brought back a lot of nostalgia, and which led into the Montreal Screwjob and the whole Bret screwed Bret thing, which led into Vince McMahon basically embracing the heel persona of Mr. McMahon.
Yep.
Which we'll talk about in just a moment. But first, we need to take our network mandated break from our friends at Invader Coffee. But when we come back, we'll talk about episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Mr. McMahon. Stand by and stay tuned for more No Credentials Required. This episode of No Credentials Required is brought to you by Invader Coffee. For the coffee lover who wants good, quality coffee with no bullshit and no filler, Invader Coffee is an ultra-premium, veteran-owned coffee company proudly delivering only the best coffee your hard-earned money can buy. They aim to only serve the highest quality, organic, air-roasted coffee beans sourced from free trade farms all over the world. They keep things simple. The best coffee at an affordable price in order to provide you with the value you deserve for your morning boost. 100% fair trade, 100% organic coffee beans, 100% air-roasted, 100% money-back guarantee. Visit invadercoffee.com, enter promo code BELLYUP at checkout, and receive 15% off your order. That's right, folks. Invader Coffee has been one of the premier sponsors at No Credentials Required pretty much since the inception of the podcast. And we have a promo code with BellyUp. Use promo code BellyUp at checkout for 15% off your order. But also you can support the show by visiting our affiliate link, which will be in the description on the YouTube page and on the podcast side. Invader Coffee, it's the smoothest coffee you will ever buy. And as that handsome bearded man said in the commercial, it's 100% air roasted. So all that acidity that you get with regular coffee that's on the shelf at your supermarket, none of it's here. It's 100% air roasted beans, which takes out all that acidity. They're whole brew. They're organic beans. They're top notch. And it's the best coffee your hard-earned money can buy. It's 100% money back guarantee. So if you don't like the product, which I guarantee you will like this product. You'll absolutely like this product. If you don't like it, they will give you your money back. And I can attest to this product. I said I want to try it before they became an affiliate. I tried it, fell in love with it, and now they're an affiliate. Dustin tried it before he became part of the show. And he'll tell you straight away it's some of the best coffee he's ever tasted. And you'll not want to put any sugar, any milk, any cream, any kind of creamer, any kind of stuff that will add more calories. You can straight up drink this black and you will not be disappointed.
For sure. They have flavor profiles to satisfy your palate. It doesn't have some of the acidity that other coffees have from time to time. It's air roasted, and I've just been happy with every flavor I've tried. Donut Dealer is one of my favorites. The holiday blends, I always love those. Yeah. The OG blend, I've got to get a bag of that again. There's just so much to choose from, and it gets to your door very quickly. You pay a little bit more in shipping, but it gets there quick. You can use the code at checkout to offset some of the shipping costs, and their service is second to none. If you ever have an issue All you have to do is contact them. They'll get right back to you about the status of your order and explain any issue. And one time when my order was delayed for reasons beyond their control, frankly, they gave me a little discount code as a thank you for my patience. So, very, very good product and good service as well.
That's right. And again, order through our affiliate link. It can help the show by ordering through our affiliate link. It'll be in the podcast description. It'll also be on the Belly Up YouTube page description. And again, save some more with promo code Belly Up at checkout. You get 15% off your order. It arrives at your door fast. It arrives at your door either whole bean or ground. It doesn't matter which kind you like. You'll get it either. You'll get it straight away to your door. And in Bitter Coffee, you get the coveted, no credentials required, seal of approval. There's Puppers looking so cute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to move on to episode 4 of the Mr. McMahon limited series, which is called Attitude. This is all about the aftermath of the Montreal Screwjob.
Yes.
The hate that generated after the Screwjob that Vince McMahon decided to embrace as his on-screen heel persona, brings in the Attitude era, has rivalries with Stone Cold Steve Austin, with The Rock, with the Generation X, led by now Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And it just became one of the best. It just sent the WWF into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
From there forward.
Yep, it did. And I have to ask you, Ryan, because this is the era that I remember. I was in high school when the Attitude Era broke. I was a freshman when the Attitude Era really started taking off. I was in like 8th, 9th, 10th grade and into 11th. Wrestling was white hot for me then. Yeah. Everybody my age was watching it. Everybody in school was talking about it. But I have to say, looking back on some of these segments, when they are examined through the lens of this documentary, I'm going, oh man, I don't know. I there was a lot of things that happened, and I don't know if it was 4, 5, and 6. This is when the documentary, through no fault of its own, but it starts to haze together for me, because as it gets into the more modern era, I had a harder time differentiating the episodes. But it was all good. But for me, the thing was Vince's insistence that this was still a family-friendly product.
Yeah.
I'm looking back at it, I'm going, no, it's not.
Looking at the lens of today, now that we're older, now that a lot of people who watched WWE back then now are adults and have kids of their own. Yeah. They would not allow kids back in the 90s to watch that. Yeah. Watch the Attitude Era version of WWE.
Yeah, and there was somebody in the documentary. I don't know if it was Bruce Pritchard, because I think he said
it was Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, it was Shawn Michaels.
Michaels.
He was saying, because I think Bruce Pritchard said, "Oh, I'd let him watch it." Shawn Michaels was like, "I'm not letting them." Yeah,
he's like, "I have a daughter now, and I would definitely not allow her to watch that, let alone be a part of it."
Yeah, and it was interesting, particularly to get Trish Stratus's thoughts on it. Because she was like, hey, I didn't mind doing the segments. A lot of people, she said that a lot of people still ask her about it. And she said, I was doing what I had to do. And some of those ideas were Linda's, and they talk about the certain angle. And she said, it was a thing that I did. I had fun doing it. And, in the case of Trish Stratus, her talent shone through, because she became an amazing wrestler. And if you watch documentaries on her, she really put the work in, because she wanted to be more of an athlete in the ring.
Yeah, she was a fitness model before she went into the ring. She said she grew up watching WWF.
Yes.
You didn't really see women's wrestling profiled, but her, Molly Holly, Mickey James, Lita, Jackie, a lot of those women started bringing women's wrestling into the forefront. Because back then you had Wendy Richter, you had Leilani Kai, you had Fabulous Moolah.
Yeah, the Fabulous Moolah.
Who became problematic later on.
Very
Mae
very
Young,
problematic.
Mae Young. So women's wrestling was starting to become a thing. And you see it now, but compared to then, which they use a lot of their sexual appeal.
Oh yeah.
Nowadays, it's more about the athleticism. We'll talk about that a little bit later in episode. I believe it was episode 6. They really started to profile it. But in episode 4, during the Attitude Era, women's wrestling, again, it was more about their sex appeal than their athleticism. But there were still some matches that were kind of, I would say, memorable. But there were a few that stood out.
Yeah, a couple, but the tenor of the matches, and Vince does say with certain angles and certain storylines, I think all the way back in episode 2 when they're talking about some of making the heels just basically people from other countries. We made them heels. That's that's the way. And he said, now if you do that angle, it'd be a problem. But back then, it's a different time, different time and place. And to some extent, I agree with that. A different time, different place, but it doesn't always mean that it excuses it. And I really started to struggle as we advanced into the documentary. I was like, man, I used to watch this. Like my mom let me watch this. I was like, man, I look at the Attitude Era with rose-colored glasses because I got swept up in it. And I was the person. I was a WWF loyalist. I will come out and say that. I started with the WWF. I was a loyalist, but I did flip over to WCW quite a bit because the NWO was pretty cool. And I was a huge fan of Diesel when I was a kid. So when he went to WCW, of course, I wanted to see what Big Daddy Cool was up to there with Razor Ramon down in WCW. And I will give credit to where credit is due. Eric Bischoff says, where do you think Mr. McMahon got the idea for the heel character? He said, I did it first, which you can't argue with that. He did.
Then you see, in the cut scene says, well, if Vince McMahon says, well, if Eric Bischoff wants to take credit, okay, fine, let him take credit. But
and then he said, but I did it better. And I don't think I would argue with that. He did it better. But one of my favorite parts, and then I will be quiet down here. My favorite part, though, was they go, Vince, how much do you think the character Mr. McMahon is like you? And he said, it's nothing like me. Then they cut to a bunch of people, a whole bunch of people.
Bruce Pritchard was like, one of the biggest ones. Like, he totally did that angle. He totally yelled at me.
He's like, some of the stuff he said in those angles, he said to me, like it was directed at me. He's like, it's 100% him. And then, I think Undertaker was like, it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. And then the producer says, well, Bruce Pritchard said it was you totally did that to him. He's like, well, I don't remember doing that.
I know.
So towards the end of the episode, we bring up May 23rd, 1999. The Over the Edge pay-per-view event where Owen Hart tragically lost his life in a very tragic accident. And at the time, Bret Hart, Vince McMahon were not on good terms, not on good business terms. We actually saw that as a result of the Montreal Screwjob. Vince McMahon left the Bell Center with a black eye.
Yep.
And pretty much a fractured orbital bone because Bret Hart got him good.
Yeah.
But there were conspiracies going around the internet. The internet was young at the time. This was the dawn of the internet when Al Gore released it to the public and said, here it is, world. Here's the internet. I invented it. Man, bear, pig. But all jokes aside with that, Owen Hart, a bad harness snapped as he was coming down from the ring, fell to his death.
Yeah.
I would have been heartbroken too in that situation because I remember during the broadcast, I didn't order the event, but I remember seeing footage of Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler. All they did was just focus on. They put the camera and the TV was just exclusively on them, and they're watching, having to watch Owen Hart being put on a stretcher, almost basically put in a body bag in the ring. And wheeled out for wrestling. And at the time, we don't know for sure. I mean, I believe it's true. Wrestlers having to see Owen Hart being wheeled out of the arena, his lifeless body being led out of the arena, and having to continue to wrestle.
Yeah,
with his blood on the mat.
Mm.
That's a tough scene.
Yeah.
That's very tough because the internet is a terrible place sometimes. And especially in the early days, because of their tenuous relationship, people thought that Vince McMahon had Owen Hart.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and
I
Brett,
won't say the word,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know where I'm getting at.
But Brett says it in the documentary. He said, I wondered if they did that to get to him because I left. Or he said, I wondered if that was a retaliation because I left. And I'm going, oh man. But he corrects himself. He said, but that's the headspace I was in at the time.
Yeah,
He
because of the relationship.
yeah.
And then it comes to the cut where Bret Hart said, yeah, the the detective from the Kansas City Police Department called me, and he said this was just a very terrible accident, and I
Yeah.
was at peace with it.
Mm-hmm.
So at least he had that in that regard, and it was just sad. What a sad day.
No,
Period.
yeah,
Because
it was.
Owen Hart was starting to become one of my favorite wrestlers at the time.
Oh yeah, well, and the other thing, the heartbreaking thing, just real quickly, apparently Owen was trying to save up money to retire. He wanted to spend more time with his kids. It was supposed to be one of his last matches. He was gearing up. He supposedly had said he had enough. He was getting ready to go, and yeah, it just and the sad thing is, I remember we were bereft, Ryan, wrestling fans. When we went to school, we heard about it the next day. All of us were very sad, and people didn't believe it. People thought it was a fake. They're like, "Oh, that didn't happen." And it's like, "Yeah, no, it did. It did." What a sad time.
Very sad day, for sure, for sure. Well, actually, it's interesting that it leads up to today. After that incident, WWE said we're not going to do that bit anymore. We're not going to have wrestlers come down in a harness from the ceiling because of what happened.
Yeah.
And they went up suing the company that the harness was in, the harness company, because they knew that harness was defective.
Yeah.
Which led to everything going down. And,
yes.
It was a sad day, and I'm still sad. It comes to my mind every so often. I'm like, what if Owen Hart was still with us?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we're going to lead you to part 5, which is called Family Business. And this goes into the 21st century. WWF goes public. They bought out WCW. The XFL goes into XFL is born, and then
summarily
dies.
Does not. Yeah.
And then it was just it goes into bad times again with the WWF. They lose their acronym to the World Wildlife Fund of all people, and you just start to see a ratings decline because you don't have a competition anymore. The Rock's going to Hollywood.
Yeah.
He's going to Hollywood. Austin walks out the promotion because he hates the creative. And then you see Vince McMahon transition from the Attitude Era, because we see the eras. We see the 80s, the golden age.
Yep.
Arguably the golden age because, well, Hulk Hogan. Moving into the new generation era, which was led by Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, which leads into the Attitude Era with The Rock, Shawn Michaels, with The Rock, D-Generation X, and Stone Cold Steve Austin. And now you move into the Ruthless Aggression Era with John Cena, the rise of John Cena.
Yeah, which I would say I was out by this time. I was out.
Yeah, I was kind of
at the start of the Ruthless Aggression Era, and it does say Vince said I think if I'm remembering correctly, he did make a shift to a more family-friendly product again and started marketing to a younger demographic, as opposed to a very poignant scene earlier in the documentary when he's insisting that we were always a family product. We never moved from that. He said, and I'll be very careful with how I say this, but the cuts, again, were brilliantly done. He said, nobody ever used a gun. They cut to the Pillman angle. He said nobody was ever assaulted. They cut to a bunch of it. Everything.
Nobody
that
ever
he
used a knife, and they
lists.
cut to Kai and Tai.
Yeah.
Val Venus.
Everything.
Oh.
Everything that he says, they cut to. It's a direct contradiction. It is all, again, undercutting Vince McMahon's reliability as a narrator, and partially by his own admission, which I think is the brilliance of this documentary.
It is really. And then during that era where they go public, they're still a publicly traded company. WWE is still in the stock market. They're still a publicly traded company, and their stock has risen since they went to the PG-ish era. They talk about the failings. They opened the restaurant in Times Square, the WWE restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
They did the XFL, which in the beginning, the ratings were through the roof. And this is the time that NBC needed football because the NFL had gone from NBC to CBS.
Mm-hmm.
Because CBS bought the AFC rights, because NBC had the AFC rights for a number of years. And then CBS bought those rights in, I want to say, 2000.
Yeah, I would say that's probably around right.
Yeah, if we get it wrong, we'll correct ourselves in the next episode. But
yeah,
but the NBC and the 30 for the brilliant 30 for 30. This was the XFL.
Yeah,
It talks about McMahon's relationship with Dick Ebersol, who was head of NBC Sports at the time. They put their heads together. They tried to make a product. It didn't work. It didn't work because the football was absolutely was. I'll say it. It was garbage.
Yeah, and I mean, there were a lot of injuries to start, and then they had TV difficulties. Infamously, in week 2 during an overtime game, it cut out. Because apparently
between the LA Extreme and the Chicago the Chicago Enforcers.
Yes, and who was quarterbacking? Who was quarterbacking the Extreme at that point? I believe it was Tommy Maddox. Yeah,
Tommy Maddox was the quarterback, and the coach of the Chicago Enforcers was Dick Butkus.
Oh man!
But yeah, I went to that infamous double overtime with they delay Saturday Night Live. They kept delaying it, and Dick Ebersol's getting Lorne Michaels was getting upset.
Yeah,
because they were constantly being preempted But yeah, that 30 for 30. If you want to watch what happened with the XFL, if you want more detailed, go watch that 30 for 30. Yeah, it's a great storytelling. It's great, It's just incredible. And it was funny. It kind of dovetailed into the of XFL 2.0 in 2000 or 2020, which unfortunately got canceled halfway through that season because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I'd hope for that league because it was a much better product. It was much better football than in 2001.
Yeah.
But you talk about some of the failings that went on. The restaurant went out of business. They had to close the restaurant. XFL didn't come back for a second season. That infamous Bob Costas interview with Vince McMahon.
Oh, yeah.
Which got everyone's attention at the time.
Yep. Not a good look. And I will say, as I get older, Costas in documentaries, I've had enough of them. He just comes off as smarmy, and he always turns invariably. I understand why they go get him.
Dustin. He's always been smarmy.
Yeah. I understand why they go get him, because he's always going to give you a quote, and he's going to say something that makes the footage. But I'm just like, man, Costas, enough already. All right.
But that was episode 5. And in the end, towards the end, you had Shane McMahon deciding to leave the company. In 2009 to pursue his own ventures. And had that interesting scene with Paul Heyman about the disagreement about something creative. And Shane McMahon actually brought the idea of the WWE buying UFC when it was still having money trouble, still trying to get a foothold in the mainstream. It's not, which ironically, they're now owned by the same company in Denver.
Yes, they
TKO.
are. TKO acquired WWE, which we'll get into in episode 6. But to me, Ryan, before we leave episode 5, I just want to get your opinion, because my opinion is that although I think subtly, the documentary paints Stephanie McMahon as the true successor to Vince McMahon, and they talk about Vince and Shane and their relationship and how Shane always viewed himself as next. And I think undercuttingly so, the documentary kind of says, Stephanie's kind of taken that role.
Because of what Tony Atlas said. He
yes.
said, and Shane McMahon had kind of the same feeling. He's like, yeah, I always kind of saw myself as the person who would take over the company.
Yeah.
And he cut to Tony Atlas saying, you know why Shane would never become boss of the company? It's because Shane is too nice.
Yeah.
And nice people don't do well. You'll get run over. Stephanie is a shark, just like her dad.
Man, all right. You gotta keep bringing back your Tony Atlas impression, all right? I like it. But what I want to ask you, in my opinion, Shane McMahon comes off the best in this. For a myriad of reasons, Shane McMahon comes off the best in this entire documentary, in my opinion. And I just came away looking from this documentary being like, man, Shane, I wish you got what you were looking for. And I also want to sit down and have a beer with one Shane McMahon.
I did too.
He put his body through a meat grinder, all in the name of looking for approval for his dad dad.
Yeah. And it just seemed like it's kind of, I wouldn't say ironically, but it's just interesting that the love that Vince McMahon Jr. chased from his dad is the same love that Shane McMahon is chasing from Vince.
Yes.
To get to Vince. And it just seems very sad.
Yep.
It just seems like he'll never, at least in the public eye, he'll never get it.
Yeah. He got the hug on that after that WrestleMania
32.
match. Yeah. Yep. But that seems to be about it.
You need to fly from the top of Hell in a Cell through a table to get a hug from your dad. Man.
Yeah.
More power to you.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And Vince says, I'll do anything for the business. I think you need to look to your son, Vince, because Shane was doing anything from the business. I was wincing on that infamous spot where Kurt Angle kept trying to throw Shane through those panels. And he says it. He says, I goaded him. I had to get him mad because I wanted those panels to break. Shane looked like he'd been through a car crash, you know, and there were, I forget who it was, but they cut to somebody and they said he could have died. You know, Shane would always,
it was Paul Heyman.
Yeah. Shane would always put himself at risk. Like even they could tell. They said Shane was always looking for something from his father and doing and sacrificing himself. He would always go the extra mile, and you could see it. Even that jump, his trademark jump kick into the trash can from one side of the ring to the other. Not too many people make that jump. And he's not a wrestler for a living.
No, but he is very athletic. The last time we saw him in a WWE ring was 2 years ago. And unfortunately, he tore his quad trying to do a leapfrog over The Miz, which led to an impromptu ending of his match with The Miz, where Snoop Dogg used brass knucks to punch The Miz in the face and get the 1, 2, 3. That's how it ended. And that's the last time you saw Shane McMahon in a WWE ring. And he actually wound up signing with AEW, but we haven't heard hide nor hair from him. And apparently it's a good thing. So, because he actually proposed, it was rumored that the rumor and innuendo, Dustin, was that he tried to help creative in AEW and Tony Khan just basically ghosted him. And Eric Bischoff has gone on record saying it's probably the best thing that could have happened because creative at AEW is not that great right now.
Yeah, it's a dumpster fire.
Which leads us to the finish, episode 6. And this is where we get into from 2007 all the way up until present day, or at the time of the recording, which was September 25th, 2004. You had the infamous Donald Trump match, the hair versus hair match. And apparently there was supposed to be, there was the the quote death of Mr. McMahon the next night on Raw, and they were supposed to be an episode where we had a memorial service for Mr. McMahon, and then the Chris Benoit incident happened.
Yeah.
And we don't need to go into that. We want to go to those grisly details.
No.
But here's the thing. It kind of leads into the discussion about concussions and head injuries and chair shots and all that stuff, which led to former WWE wrestler and current neuroscientist Chris Sawinski examining Benoit's brain, coming to the conclusion that he suffered from CTE. And now the wrestlers, I mean, the old school wrestlers like Undertaker, you saw the interview with him. He got concussed in his match against Brock Lesnar that broke the streak.
Yep.
At WrestleMania 30. And he said, yeah, Brock tossed me and I got a knock on my head. And I had a concussion. I had to push through the end of that match.
Yeah, he said he didn't really remember it.
He didn't really remember anything. Yeah. But it's funny that I won't say funny, but interestingly enough that he said, yeah, when we talked about concussions and that we gotta be out for a certain amount of time, I was pissed at the time. But this was back again. Undertaker says, I'm an old school guy. Yeah, we really don't believe in concussions. If you got a concussion and you didn't stop wrestling because you didn't get paid. But nowadays with guaranteed contracts and better health care, and you're not wrestling, it's not 6 days on, 1 day off anymore. It's now 4 days on, 3 days off, which is better for the wrestlers because they got better contracts, they got better deals, they got better health care, they got better rehab. The wellness policy is much improved because, and at the time of the Chris Benoit situation, it was linked to steroids.
Yep.
But steroids don't make you do that kind of behavior unless you already have that problem, like a really bad anger or temper issue. It doesn't really lead to that stuff because I've seen those 1980s afternoon school specials with the steroids. I've seen that South Park episode with Jimmy trying to get to the Special Olympics. The myth of the steroids messing with your brain and making you raged out. That's kind of that's old hat.
It's passé. Yeah,
it's very passé, which led to them really toning down the headshots. With them, I think I remember a couple matches where in the past where I've watched, because I've kind of gotten back into wrestling over the last 8 or 9 years. It's become a more interesting product, at least to me. You've seen matches stop because of a head injury or a significant injury to the talent. And WWE is trying to do their best to mitigate injury, trying to make things in the best interest of the, let's call them what they are, stunt athletes.
Yeah. Yeah. So entertainers.
I've gone long enough, Dustin. Go ahead. You can give me your thoughts about what happened. What's going on in episode 6.
No, it's fine because I've been long in other areas, but I'll go into episode 6. So they talk about the acquisition. This is where they start to get into some of the grisly details of some of the controversies surrounding Vince McMahon in the now, because I think the documentary does a good job of setting up the fact that controversy is something that kind of followed Vince McMahon for his entire tenure. But what I like, because I'm gonna start trying to land the plane from my perspective here. What I like about this documentary is they didn't dive headfirst into the controversy and just focus on it, and because I didn't know what was coming. I like how it was a slow build. They brought you through the different eras, and they slowly built the image of Vince McMahon that they wanted to show you to the best of their ability, because he's very upfront at the beginning. He says, you're not going to get the full story from me. I play a character, and sometimes I can't distinguish which is which. And that is an underarching theme of the whole documentary. But they didn't just go all in on the modern controversy, but they do talk about, especially in episode 6, the acquisition of the WWE by TKO. And initially, Vince McMahon was going to be part of a CEO group of that new merged company. And because of the acquisitions and the court cases, the accusations and the court cases that had come out, he had to step down. But then they really get into, he then bought it, basically got back in. He got
Yeah.
back in, and then there was more controversy, and he was forced to exit for good this time. And it just is. But I liked that they didn't go right into that immediately. They
No,
teased it a
gotta
little
build it.
bit, but they
It's what they call long-term storytelling, Dustin.
yes, and I think the themes of this documentary, they allow you to form your own opinions about one Vincent Kennedy McMahon, and he is the focus of this documentary. But they do a pretty good job of painting with a brush without being obvious about it. The cuts, the way they shoot things, the
Mhm.
people they interview, the quotes that they use, the direct contradictions that sometimes Vince himself puts himself in, similar to Pete Rose in the documentaries. And you said it, The Last Dance established the new template for documentaries, and I think to some degree 30 for 30s before them. Guess who was involved with all of those, especially in the beginning? Bill
Bill
Simmons.
Simmons.
So I do enjoy this format of documentary, and also the McMahon family. What's not to like? Because you're always going to want to know more. And I think this really did a big some heavy lifting of revealing the possible relationship between Vince and Shane, and possibly getting into the reasons that he left the company because he didn't like the direction it was going. But it establishes Vince McMahon is king in his own world. Up until very recently, that
Mhm.
was the way it is. And I like some of the sound bites at the end. You see the McMahon loyalist, and you see Bruce Pritchard is not happy. He goes, "This is gonna, you're not gonna know the real Vince McMahon. You're gonna paint the Vince McMahon that you want us to see." But he said that will never be the Vince McMahon that paid for my wife's cancer treatments when
Right.
she was going through it. it there there's the dichotomy of Vince McMahon, the classic case of trying to separate the art from the artist, so to speak. But I think if you are a fan of wrestling, you've got to reckon with the fact that Vince McMahon may be more the character than a separation. And but that's what makes it so interesting.
Mhm.
Without jumping into the controversy, that's the classic thing. Can you separate the art from the artist? Do you truly know a person? And I think the documentary leaves us with enough mystery. We'll never truly know Vincent Kennedy McMahon. I don't think anybody will. But this documentary does a darn good job trying to paint a picture, and without leaning all the way in to the controversy. If you're a wrestling fan, watch this, because it's a great walk down memory lane. If you watched, it's a great history lesson. If you're relatively new and you haven't watched, it does a great job of explaining why perhaps people care so much about this family when it comes to this company. And you cannot talk about the McMahons without talking about the WWE. They are intertwined, they are one. And Vince says repeatedly he'll do anything for the business. I think he proved that for the better and for the worse.
Yeah.
We just talked at length about this documentary, but go watch it if you're at all interested. And also, watch some of the surrounding things. Ryan has mentioned the 30 for 30 on the XFL. Go watch that. I mentioned the Dark Side of the Ring Unheard podcast. Go listen to that for Brett's some enlightening quotes about Brett's perspective of the Montreal Screwjob. If you want to know more about the Montreal Screwjob, go watch Dark Side of the Ring. But again, take care. You might not want to watch some of this stuff or listen to some of this stuff around your kids. But I would wholeheartedly recommend this documentary.
Yeah. I'll leave with two thoughts. First, They interview Booker T, or as they or as the documentary says, Booker T. Huffman.
Yep.
That's his real name.
Yes.
They asked the producers asked him what would it take for Vince McMahon to leave, because he was asked, will Vince ever retire? He's like, I don't think he'll ever retire. It's like, what do you think would need to happen for him to retire? He said, a nuclear bomb. And then the allegation of the Janelle Grant case comes out. And if you want more details about this case, if you're really, really up to
careful.
Be careful. Law and Crime, the YouTube channel Law and Crime does a really solid job of giving the breakdown of the case. And again, he's being accused of trafficking her, of doing really some really awful stuff to this young lady, just basically taking advantage of her.
Yeah, some
for his own
unspeakable things. Yeah.
And the second thing was a quote from Paul Heyman, which basically said, Vince has only been in one monogamous relationship his entire life.
Yeah.
It is with the wrestling business. It is his love. It is his master. I'm paraphrasing most of it here, but he says it is his first love and it is his master, and he will do anything for the business, which was very telling. But yeah, you see, as you said, Dustin, you can't say pro wrestling without saying the McMahon family. And right now, they're no longer the primary of the WWE. It's now held by TKO Group Holdings, which is a part of Endeavor. And they're now hand in hand with the UFC. So, what the future has in store for the WWE, we don't know, but we know that Vince McMahon had a very big hand in it from very early on, from 50 years, at least 50 years.
Yeah, all the way from when they basically mortgaged everything to put the first WrestleMania on.
Yep.
And you could see that maniacal drive. Vince McMahon, say what you want about him, but he had a vision and he did everything he could to execute it.
For better or for worse. All right, we're going to get out of here then. Thanks for sticking with us, folks. We appreciate you. We'll be back on Wednesday night. We'll go live around probably 8:30 and just talk about what happened this weekend. But in the meantime, just want to remind you to follow us on social media. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on YouTube. Just search No Credentials Required. Also find more podcasts and articles on bellyupsports.com. On the podcast side, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Music, iHeart, TuneIn, and Pandora. And also don't forget to hit that notification button. Hit that notification bell on Twitter and on YouTube. That way you know when live shows go up, when the audio for this podcast is available, because it's also available on YouTube. Also for any show clips that might pop up, hit that notification bell so you get yourself properly notified. But in the meantime, we're going to get out of here. Thanks for sticking with us for the special edition of No Credentials Required, where you don't need a press pass to talk sports. We are proudly presented by Belly Up Sports. For Dustin Henry, I'm Ryan McCarthy. We'll see you next week for the official recording of episode 262 of No Credentials Required. Have a great weekend and be safe.
Good morning, everybody.